Let's start with a question that has everyone stumped, and I'm talking about violence against women. What can you do about it?
Well, this is an issue that I've been engaged with for pretty much all my adult life. I started at McGill as one of the only male facilitators in the Sexual Assault Center for their outreach program, which was all about sensitization, communication, talking about the challenges of sexual assault on campus and in society. So this is an issue that is very, very important to me. The Liberal Party is committed to actually strengthening the consequences of domestic violence, for example, and we're looking with a lot of interest in the Ontario government's approach to highlight, in their campaign, to highlight and change mindsets around violence against women.
And how do you go about changing mindsets?
Well, I think ad campaigns, leadership from the federal government in terms of behaviors, strengthening the criminal code as well in terms of consequences for repeat offenders on domestic violence. We need to start making it very clear that it's absolutely unacceptable in 2015 to see any sort of violence against women.
You're not putting any money there, are you?
We will be putting forward money, but on the infrastructure announcements that we've made of $20 billion in social infrastructure over the next 10 years, that includes women's shelters. That includes help to ensure that we're actually making sure that women have a place to go when they're dealing with conjugal violence, for example.
Would you care to put forth a figure for women's shelters?
Well, the issue with the infrastructure program we're putting forward is we're being a partner to municipalities and provinces. I don't think it's up to the federal government to draw lines on a map or to tell a municipality what it needs and where. Municipalities have serious needs to increase women's shelters, and provinces need a partner from the federal government. And with our historic investments that we've announced, we're going to be able to partner and make sure that they happen.
Last fall, the Jian Ghomeshi scandal opened, the floodgates in terms of a specific kind of violence, sexual violence. It is the violence that is the most unreported. Only 10% of sexual violence is reported at the present time. You got a bit of a taste of it shortly after that when two of your MPs there were allegations against them and you suspended them. What did you know about that situation?
One of the things that I do know, as you highlighted, that's a crime that is often, or issues that are often unreported or underreported. And therefore, when I heard directly of serious allegations of personal misconduct by two of my members of Parliament, I suspended them immediately. I knew that in 2015 or 2014, it was time to act, and I did exactly that.
I know that in the situation we're talking about, the woman in question, the issue of the NDP, got a lot of criticism for not going to the police. I believe she didn't go to the police, did she?
Listen, I'm never going to ask whether someone should have gone to the police or not. That's certainly not my decision. That's her decision. I respected her decision. But when she came to the leader of a different party to talk about this, I realized that this was something that I wasn't simply going to shrug and look away from. If she felt it important enough that I should know, even though we had pretty much never talked before, I was to take that seriously, and that's exactly what I did. And I think because of that, we are now putting into place, the House of Commons and certainly the Liberal Party is moving forward on a very clear set of standards of behaviour and expectations and a process whereby individuals working in Parliament, including members of Parliament and senators, are going to be able to avail themselves of potential difficulties, of help in potential situations like these.
Elizabeth May told us that, she, the women in Parliament, Senate and government get together to talk about various issues concerning women, and they've all admitted to, having not only experienced sexism, but a lot of them have also experienced violence. If it's that difficult for women, especially in Parliament, one wonders, do the men in Parliament see this? I mean, were you ever aware that, there was a lot of sexual harassment going on?
Politics is often perceived as a bit of an old boys network, and certainly coming in as a younger person in politics at the same time as we've seen a lot of young people step forward into politics, there is a little bit of a clash of cultures, perhaps, from the way things used to be to the way things need to be. So certainly I'm not unaware and have never been unaware that there are problems on Parliament Hill like there are in a lot of workplaces.
What about doing something about the judicial process? What can be done about that?
We can talk about the judiciary and rules around police procedures needing to change, but what we really need is a societal change for women to feel comfortable coming forward and telling a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a parent, an employer, a friend, the community, what has happened to them. There's still tremendous stigma around sexual violence as if it's somehow the victim's fault. And that's something I've been dealing with for 20 years, for my volunteer years at McGill. And we need to make sure that we are creating a society that is accepting and respectful and understands that violence against women is not just a women's issue, it's everyone's issue, and men have a very important role to play in moving things forward.
I was going to say, you'd like to think that this is the problem of an older generation of men who haven't quite accepted that women have their equal place in the workplace and everywhere else in society. But actually, a lot of the abuse that we're seeing now, be it the abuse when women journalists do stand-ups, the obscenities that are yelled at them, the anonymous blogger at the University of Toronto the other day, these are young men.
Yeah.
These are not old men. These are young men. How do you explain that?
I don't know where exactly to point my finger. I think there's probably an awful lot of factors that come together to shape societal behaviors, whether it's certain types of music. There's a lot of misogyny in certain types of music. There's issues around pornography and its prevalence now and its accessibility, which is something I'm really wrapping my heads around as a father of kids who are approaching their teen years. And there's also just the shifting parental roles as well. There's a lot of communities in which fathers are less present than they have been or they might be in the past, and there's a more need to have engaged, positive role models.
There seems to be a lot of anger against not just women, but against feminism and feminists. Would you describe yourself as a feminist?
Yes, I am a feminist. I'm proud to be a feminist. My mom raised me to be a feminist. My father raised me, he was of a different generation, but he raised me to respect and defend everyone's rights. I deeply grounded my own identity in that, and I'm proud to say I'm a feminist. And the things that we see online, whether it's issues like Gamergate and video games and misogyny in popular culture, is something that we need people to stand clearly against.
Pour continuer notre conversation, M. Trudeau, les premiers ministres canadiens aiment toujours dire, et d'ailleurs un de vos prédécesseurs, Jean Chrétien, aimait particulièrement le dire, combien le Canada est un pays enviable et envié. Mais il y a une chose qui n'est pas du tout enviable, c'est la place que les femmes occupent, notamment en politique. Nous sommes 50e, le Canada est 50e sur 145 pays. Et vous-même, votre parti, si je ne m'abuse, vous avez à peu près 32% de femmes candidates. Ce n'est donc pas une priorité.
Oui, c'est une priorité. Nous avons un moment de renouveau pour le Parti libéral où je me suis engagé à des nominations ouvertes à travers le pays, donc on n'allait pas choisir. Et dans les années passées, le chef avait mis de côté un certain nombre de comtés pour pouvoir présenter des candidates. Et moi, je me suis dit que, au lieu de tout simplement désigner des femmes, nous allions créer des nominations ouvertes, mais avant qu'on puisse déclencher ces nominations, ces investitures, nous allions exiger que les gens locaux aillent demander à des femmes de se présenter, fassent une recherche sérieuse pour avoir plus de femmes. On a encore du travail à faire, mais c'est pour ça, entre autres, que je suis le seul à avoir pris l'engagement pour la parité au cabinet des ministres.
Mais il y a quelque chose qui bloque, visiblement, gouvernement, par rapport à la politique notamment, je crois les femmes c'est pas, même pas le tiers. Donc, est-ce qu'il ne faut pas, devant une situation comme celle-là, avoir des mesures, des quotas, c'est-à-dire des mesures qui favorisent les femmes?
La mesure qui favorise les femmes, c'est que j'ai dit très clairement qu'on va avoir 50% de notre cabinet des ministres qui va être formé de femmes. Ce symbole-là et cette action-là va aller très loin vers l'encouragement de plus de femmes de s'impliquer parce qu'elles vont pouvoir faire une vraie différence. Mais en même temps, je reconnais absolument qu'on a beaucoup plus de travail à faire pour atteindre un pourcentage respectueux et respectable de femmes en politique et je m'engage à continuer de le faire.
Madame May croit qu'une chose qui pourrait être très, très importante, non seulement pour la politique canadienne dans son ensemble, mais pour les femmes en particulier, ce serait d'adopter au prochain Parlement la représentation proportionnelle. Qu'en pensez-vous?
Comme j'ai dit, je pense que notre système actuel de votation a besoin d'être révisé. Il y a bien des options sur la table. Moi, ce que je veux, c'est pas tout simplement adresser les symptômes du problème, mais bien les racines du problème. Et si on peut avoir un processus en politique où les gens sont écoutés, où on ne récompense pas le plus ceux qui attaquent, ceux qui livrent leur message de façon robotique mais solide, ceux qui savent passer un message sans compromis, sans écoute de l'autre. C'est ça le problème. Nous avons besoin d'avoir de meilleures qualités de conversation, de débat, d'intervention, de processus législatif pour pouvoir justement créer un climat dans lequel les gens sont entendus.
À juger du débat qui vient de se passer entre vous, M. Mulcair, M. Harper, ça va encourager les femmes parce que c'était pas mal agressif. Hein?
C'était très agressif. Et je déplore qu'on soit rendu là parce que la réalité, c'est que les attaques personnelles, on en a entendu surtout des autres. Moi, j'essaie d'esquisser, d'éviter les attaques personnelles. Je fais pas des publicités d'attaques négatives. Je pense que d'augmenter le cynisme réduit le nombre de bonnes personnes qui veulent se présenter en politique, dont beaucoup de femmes, et c'est ça qu'il faut changer.
Alors, pour la représentation proportionnelle, vous y êtes favorable?
Je suis ouvert à différents systèmes de changer. Une des choses que les Canadiens savent très bien, c'est que tout parti va mettre de l'avant un processus qui leur favorise. La représentation proportionnelle favorise énormément le Parti vert. Moi, je préfère dire, nous allons faire une étude indépendante, nous allons demander aux Canadiens, nous allons regarder qu'est-ce qui serait le meilleur système pour le Canada, et on va faire ça.
L'écart salarial entre les hommes et les femmes, c'est toujours 20% entre les hommes et les femmes. À ce rythme-là, ça va nous prendre, nous les femmes, 94 ans avant de vous rattraper. On n'a pas le temps d'attendre. On peut pas attendre 94 ans. Que pouvez-vous faire là-dessus?
Il y a quelques années, le gouvernement a enlevé la parité salariale des exigences de base pour la fonction publique. Nous allons restaurer ça immédiatement si on forme le gouvernement.
Mais à juger de votre plateforme, là, vous jetez votre dévolu dans les infrastructures pour l'avenir du Canada. Des infrastructures, c'est bien beau, mais ça favorise pas tellement l'emploi féminin. Hein? Il n'y a pas beaucoup de jobs pour les femmes là-dedans.
Attendez, quand on investit dans des garderies, parce qu'on va créer des places en garderie avec ces infrastructures-là, on va améliorer la qualité du transport collectif et on sait trop bien que beaucoup de gens ont de la misère à se rendre au travail. Souvent, c'est des femmes au salaire minimum. Quand on regarde, par exemple, que nous allons créer une allocation familiale plus généreuse en ne pas envoyant des chèques aux familles de millionnaires, à la place, on va donner des chèques plus gros aux familles qui en ont besoin, non imposables. Une famille monoparentale ayant 30 000 $ par année comme revenu va recevoir 6 400 $ pour un jeune enfant non imposable. Ça va sortir 315 000 jeunes de la pauvreté. Ça fait partie de notre plateforme. C'est les investissements qu'on va faire.
I'd like to continue on the question of childcare because obviously, Mr. Mulcair, this is a major platform, the NDP. He says it's not because the Liberals failed, and he's thinking of Paul Martin's plan in 2005. They had a plan. He had had convinced every province to come.
Yes.
That was getting very
It
close.
was great. No, it was great.
getting very
It was
close.
in place, and then the NDP and the Conservatives brought down the government, and that plan disappeared.
But
So
why?
it's rich of Mr. Mulcair to talk about the failure of that plan when his party was partly responsible for it.
The question is, why wouldn't you, the heir to all of that, come back with such a plan?
But we have. We have come back with that. Now, first of all, Mr. Mulcair's plan to create childcare spaces over 8 years, which means a young family with a 2-year-old will have to wait till their kid's in grade 5 before they get it, actually is conditional on partners, on the provinces, ponying up billions of dollars to create those spaces. It's not the federal government saying, here's the money, go do it. It's, you need to start doing it as well. And that kind of imposition on provinces makes you ask a lot of questions about, well, what happens in Ontario where there's already full-day kindergarten and JK? What happens in Quebec where we already have a tremendous number of childcare spaces at a very low rate? So Mr. Mulcair hasn't fully thought through his plan. What our plan is to actually show up with real money, much more money than Mr. Mulcair can put forward because he's made a different choice than we have. He has chosen as a priority to balance Mr. Harper's budget. Our priority is actually to invest in the community and in the future that we need for Canadians. And that's why we're saying it. We're going into deficit for 3 years. We're staying in deficit for 3 years so we can come out in 2019. And so right now, we can start investing in childcare spaces and in the other infrastructures that Canadians need.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but in your platform, in this campaign, there is child allocations, child benefits, but there isn't a national daycare plan.
There is $20 billion in social infrastructure that will go to the provinces and to the municipalities in terms of building low-income housing, seniors' residences, childcare spaces, shelters for vulnerable women. It's there in there. The provinces who need to create childcare spaces will be able to access significant amounts of federal money straight to them to do that. They will choose what is needed for their communities. There are some communities and some provinces who have different childcare needs. What we are saying is we are there to respond to the real needs. We are not there to impose a solution from Ottawa, particularly not in areas of provincial jurisdiction.
Je ne peux pas faire cette entrevue sans mentionner un sujet qui vient de s'introduire avec fracas dans la campagne, et je parle du niqab. Êtes-vous prêt, êtes-vous à l'aise avec l'idée de voir une femme s'effacer sur la place publique?
Je suis prêt à ce que cette femme ait ses propres choix, puisse faire ses propres choix. Ici au Canada, on protège les droits des minorités. Et si une femme fait le libre choix de vouloir porter un voile, on se doit de la protéger dans ses choix personnels, culturels, religieux, quels que ce soit. Nous devons de protéger les droits, surtout des gens vulnérables. Le principe de base du Canada, c'est justement de protéger les droits des minorités, les droits de l'individu. D'ailleurs, en tant que Québécois, en tant que francophone canadien, je comprends à quel point c'est important de protéger ces droits des minorités. Le Canada a été fondé là-dessus. Alors, pour moi, quand un gouvernement se décide de brimer ses droits ou d'enlever ses droits, comme dans ce cas-ci, le gouvernement se doit de démontrer exactement en quoi c'est nécessaire pour la sécurité, pour le bien de la société. Il y a une légitimité dans cette limitation qu'on amène. Or, ce gouvernement n'est pas en train d'expliquer en quoi ce port, pendant une cérémonie tout à fait symbolique, viendrait heurter les droits de quiconque autre dans ce pays. Pour moi, je préfère pas demander à la Cour, je préfère demander à ces femmes-là, pourquoi est-ce qu'elles portent le voile? Est-ce qu'elle est forcée de porter le voile ou est-ce qu'elle choisit de porter le voile? Est-ce que c'est son mari ou son père ou sa culture hiérarchique, patriarcale qui lui force de le faire? Ou est-ce que c'est un choix libre qu'elle fait dans la compréhension pleine qu'ici au Canada, elle a le choix de le faire ou elle a le choix de ne pas le faire. Et si elle a quitté un pays qui lui imposait ce voile, et c'est tout ce qu'elle a connu, et elle cherche à venir dans un pays où il y a plus de liberté, quel message est-ce qu'on donne si on est en train de lui dire, mais vous n'avez pas la liberté de vivre de vos propres choix?
Another question which does not get much airtime when I'm talking about reproductive rights, abortion. The Canada Health Act stipulates that every Canadian woman has a right to a free, accessible abortion in good conditions. That is not being applied right now. PEI, a Liberal government, has turned away from its obligations.
I had a conversation with the Premier about this just a few months ago. The fact is they have moved in the right direction, made a significant change. There's no longer a two-doctor rule around that. But you're right, there are presently no abortions offered on the island of Prince Edward Island. And I certainly hope that that's going to change, because it's important that we make sure that full medical access to reproductive services are available to every woman across this country. And that's something that the Liberal Party is engaged in.
And finally, foreign policy. Canada, as you know, was a leader on the international stage on many fronts on this question, notably on the question of women's issues, women's rights. It has not been quite the same in the last 10 years. We're not enacting the same policies towards third world women. What would be your position if you were elected to the next government?
Actually, this might surprise people, but for me to say this, but the Canadian government actually has done a number of good things around maternal health on the world stage. And I will give credit. I disagree with Mr. Harper on an awful lot of things, but I will give him credit for a fairly ambitious program around maternal rights on the world. Unfortunately, because of ideology, he is not extending that to full reproductive services, which we know is a core issue around maternal health, meaning we have to be able to provide family planning and abortion services to those who need it around the world. And that should not be a condition that we're limiting our engagement on. So there is more to do. There is much more to do. And that's what a Liberal government will continue to do, and make sure we're doing more. We have so much more to do on the world stage on a wide range of issues that Canada has fallen behind on that touch families and women around the world, and that's something we're going to step up on.